I was 28 when my father remarried. To most people, it was just another wedding story, two adults finding companionship after loss, but to me, it was complicated. My mother had passed away 5 years earlier, and though time had softened the pain, I still carried a quiet ache that no one really understood. When Dad told me about Karen, the woman he'd been seeing for nearly a year, I tried to be supportive. She seemed kind, gentle, and respectful of our family's grief. But deep down, I wasn't sure where she fit in my heart. The first few months after their wedding were full of polite smiles and awkward conversations. Karen was careful around me, too careful sometimes. She'd ask about my work, my friends, my apartment, but I could tell she didn't want to overstep. I appreciated her efforts, but I couldn't quite let my guard down. She wasn't my mom, and part of me didn't want anyone to take that space. One Saturday afternoon, I visited Dad's house, the one where I grew up. He was out doing errands, and Karen was home tending to her garden. I remember walking past the roses she'd planted by the porch. They were stunning, all different shades of pink and red, and I felt a strange mix of admiration and resistance. She was making this house her own, and somehow, that stung. Inside, everything looked tidier than I remembered. The old family pictures still hung in the hallway, but now there were a few new ones. Karen and Dad on vacation, Karen and her sister, a photo of their wedding day. It was sweet and genuine, yet it stirred something lonely inside me. I suddenly missed my mom's laugh, her messy kitchen, her way of humming while she cooked. I headed upstairs to the bathroom to take a bath, something I hadn't done in that tub since I was a teenager. It was more nostalgia than comfort, I suppose. I filled it with warm water, poured in a handful of bubble bath from the shelf, and watched the foam rise. As I sat there, the quiet felt heavier than I expected. The house that once felt alive with laughter now felt like someone else's home. I must have been sitting there longer than I realized because there was a soft knock on the door. Emily, are you okay? Karen's voice came through, gentle but concerned. I hesitated. Yeah, I'm fine, I said, though I didn't sound it. A few seconds later, she asked, can I come in for a minute? I won't look if you're not decent, I promise. I laughed weakly. I'm fine, really, please, she said softly. You sound, not fine. Something in her tone, an honest kindness, broke down my hesitation. You can come in, I murmured. The door opened slowly. Karen stepped in wearing a loose cardigan and jeans, her expression filled with worry. She looked at me sitting there in the bubbles and smiled awkwardly. You look like you've had a long week. I guess, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. She sat on the little stool by the vanity, keeping her distance but watching me with a motherly concern that surprised me. You miss her, don't you? She said after a pause. I didn't have to ask who. I nodded, blinking away tears. Yeah, I thought I was doing better, but sometimes, I just miss her so much. Karen nodded, her own eyes glistening. I can't imagine how hard it must have been losing her so young. I never want to replace her, Emily. I just want to be here if you need someone. Her words landed gently. I hadn't expected that kind of honesty. Most people tried to fill the silence with cliches, but Karen didn't. She just sat there, real and kind, not forcing anything. For a long while, we talked about my mom, about Dad, about how hard it is to let new people into old spaces. She told me about her own loss, how her marriage years ago ended abruptly when her husband passed. I realized then that she carried her own quiet grief, one that made her understand mine more deeply than I'd given her credit for. At one point, she reached for a towel and started folding the ones by the counter, her voice calm and low. You know, she said, your mom raised an incredible daughter. She'd be proud of how strong you are. I swallowed hard. You didn't even know her. She smiled. No, but I know you. That's enough. Tears rolled down my cheeks, and I didn't even try to stop them. Karen reached over and squeezed my hand, and for the first time since Dad remarried, I didn't feel angry. I felt understood. We stayed there for over an hour, just talking. I eventually got out, wrapped myself in a robe, and we made tea in the kitchen. We laughed about silly things, how the garden never stayed weed-free, how Dad couldn't boil pasta without supervision, and by the end of the night, the walls I'd built started to crumble. When Dad came home, he was surprised to see us laughing together. Did I miss something? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Karen grinned, just some much-needed girl talk. Later that evening, as I sat on the porch watching the stars, Karen came out with a blanket and handed it to me. You know, she said softly, family isn't about replacing anyone. It's about expanding what love can hold. I nodded, tears filling my eyes again. I think I understand it now. Since that day, our relationship changed completely. She never tried to be my mother, and I never tried to keep her out. We found our own rhythm, gardening together, watching movies, cooking on weekends. Sometimes when I look at her now, I see not just my father's wife but a woman who walked into a grieving home and brought light with her. That day in the bathroom wasn't strange anymore when I thought back. It was the moment two women from different worlds finally met as family. And that's how a quiet afternoon turned into one of the most healing days of my life.